Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Seth Gerlach with Core Health. Today, we've got a special guest, and we're going to talk about genetics and your health. In particular, we're going to talk about MTHFR. If you haven't heard of it, stick around. If you have heard of it, stick around also because it's very interesting, a lot of moving parts. Luckily, we've got Dr. Emily Hecker with us today, who is somewhat of a specialist when it comes to MTHFR and really how it affects every part, every cell, everything of our body. So I am very excited to have you on here today, Dr. Emily. I know we talked a lot in the past. We're always, shooting back and forth with ideas and questions, things like that, because it's all about helping others. So I'm glad we could jump on this today and see how many other people we can help out also. So Dr. Emily Hecker, thanks for joining us. If you don't know, Dr. Emily is a functional medicine practitioner here in St. Louis. She's the owner and clinician at Enlighten Functional Medicine. So Dr. Emily, hello, welcome.
Hello.
And give us just a quick background on you.
Yeah.
And, how you got into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Seth, thank you. Thank you so much, Doc, for having me on here. And listeners, if you have questions of this, please put it in the comments below because that's where it's brewing. That's where all this is. So yeah, please comment below as you're hearing this and if you haven't already.
Sure.
So a little bit about me and how I got into this. So I am a chiropractic physician by training, but I fell in love with this functional medicine stuff. It is just like putting these dots together and figuring things out. And it's funny because I was doing a mentorship when I was in chiropractic school at a really, really great doc's office. And I was seeing a lot of moms come in. And this was when I was fresh out of school. And the moms would say, oh, yeah, I have this genetic defect called MTHFR. And then I would do some craniopathy with a baby, some real gentle work. And they would say, oh, yeah, my baby has a tongue tie. I'm like, huh. And then the next mom would come in and say, oh, I have an MTHFR defect and my baby has a tongue tie. It was just this reoccurring, just clinical reoccurrence. And I'm like, what is up with that? There was just something else that I had to dig in. Something was telling me, okay, Emily, dig deeper, dig deeper. And so I did what anyone else would do. And I, Googled MTHFR and so, you need to take folate. You need to take the active form of B9 to do this. So I started telling my patients, you need to take B9. You got to take folate. Well, you know what I ended up doing? I ended up screwing up more people.
Whoops.
Because they got worse. And I work with a lot more chronic patients. So it was really interesting to me. I'm like, how come nobody's getting, some people would feel but really I got more negative side effects with this. And it made me dig deeper and say, okay, what's up with this? Why am I'm giving them a B vitamin and they are, they're reacting bad. They're just not having good symptoms. Like some symptoms would be, they can't sleep at night. Me personally, when I have too much methylfolate and I'm not balanced, I feel like I'm looking out of two different eyes. I feel like they're not connecting in the middle. A lot of anxiety people will get, itchy feeling, just weird stuff that people have with that. So that's what dug me into finding Dr. Benjamin Lynch with MTHFR.net, I believe. And he also redid his website to drbenlynch.com, as he should, because he's a genius. He really is. He has some awesome pathway planners that I use on a daily basis. And that's where it started. That's where it started rolling down.
And his brand new book, Dirty Genes, is an amazing book, too, if you haven't read it.
Yeah, I saw you were reading it on Instagram. I saw a picture of that on there.
Yep. Oh, it's a great book. Great read. Super insightful. And so much of that stuff, it's like, wow, like connecting dots, just crazy that like, oh my gosh, it totally makes sense now.
Yeah, it is so neat. He highlights 7 major genes, and that's the neat thing about all that he does. And I just think he's so humble because he's a brilliant man. He has his own supplement company. He has his own, uploadable genetic decoder called Strategene that you can upload the raw data into. But in that book, did you hear any pitches at all for supplements or for that Strategene? No. It's you got to dig it under and you got to do the epigenetics first, which I thought was really on tap.
So we've got a lot to dive into. What you said there about how you gave some patients B9 folate and they got worse. just as a testament to you can't isolate the body into different parts because everything affects everything. And you talked about epigenetics, so we'll get into that. Let's talk about really 20,000-foot view first and genetics and how they kind of impact our health. Because I know that this Human Genome Project, which is not that old, they went through and kind of decoded the whole human genome and found a lot of interesting things that they weren't really expecting to find. And I know that we have less genes than a Pinot grape, right? So there's just a lot of variations in our genes. So could you speak to maybe, like, big picture, how genetics really affect our health? Because some people think, oh my gosh, my grandma had breast cancer, I'm going to have breast cancer, or this and that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so true. And, we are we're 99.9% the same, really, all of us as humans, but there's just some little things that go on within our genes that can cause a polymorphism or a mutation. And actually, I was digging into that the other day because I'm like, really, I find myself saying mutation, but really it's not the truth. There's this fancy word called polymorphism, meaning that if you break open a cell and you look at the DNA inside of it, how they're matching up just aren't matching up just right. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes us different. There's variance in this. So it's okay to be a little different. And actually, there was an interesting study that I was reading about lactose intolerance in genetics and how some of us, we can't tolerate dairy. But really what is supposed to happen is that that gene is supposed to go away. And we are not supposed to tolerate dairy. But those of us who've been blessed with a gene that's a polymorphism for lactose, it stays. And we can tolerate the dairy. I thought that was really interesting.
So if you can drink milk, you're odd, right?
You're the odd one, right?
So you're telling people they're not mutants if they have mutations in their genetics, right?
Yeah, it's okay to be different. But what the beauty of this is playing in, like you mentioned, the epigenetics, things that you can control can help those genes work better. So if you're thinking of it like a factory, like you have these genes, that's how I describe it. When we're looking at biochemical pathways, and it gets kind of crazy and sciencey, I say, look at all these little circles that you have to follow. It's like a connect the dots game. All those little circles have little factories inside of them. And if those factories aren't working and the gears aren't working just great, what can we do as functional medicine practitioners, or what can you do as the lay person just by choosing what food you're going to put in your mouth tonight for dinner? How can that impact how that factory moves along? And that's what we can do.
Yes, that's big. So epigenetics. So why don't we touch on that while we're there, I guess? What are the big factors, I guess you would say, can affect our body, our genome, turn off or on our genes? Because that's what we know, we learned is genes can be turned on or turned off, right? Depending on our lifestyle or epigenetics. So what are the big things you see that you deal with that are, risk factors for these genes going haywire, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I get lots of people wanting to say, okay, I have a gene, what do I do? The first place I start with is digestion. Because if you don't have a good absorbing gut, if you're not getting all of those little ingredients that make those factories move along, you're screwed. I mean, seriously, you really can't move things along very effectively. So optimizing digestion is absolutely huge. Making sure there's no pathogens. So running specific tests to make sure there's no candida or there's no mold is a big one too. Mold inhibits certain pathways in the methylation pathway. So make digestion, hands down, we got to start there. Gallbladder, liver support is huge because 80 to 90% of methylation occurs in the liver. So, yeah.
I love starting with the gut too, because you could give someone all the greatest supplements in the world. If their gut is trash, they're not getting nutrients from their food. Right. And that's how we survive. That's how we repair. That's how we detoxify. Is from nutrients we absorb through our gut. I love what you talked about, the pathogens and things like that too. That's usually where I start on everyone too. So I'm glad we're on the same page there. So
yeah,
H. pylori, parasites are huge. I see candida, really, across the board, bacterial imbalances, SIBO, fungal overgrowth, all these different things.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had a patient with worms, and that's one of the because I use the GI map panel for the stool test, and it's really interesting when you start seeing this stuff as a practitioner. I mean, I'm sure you feel the same way when you're looking at these tests that come back on a daily basis, and you're like, wow, that is, one messed up gut, and it's like, how are they getting these parasites? Because they are rampant in these worms. And we got to clean our food. We got to watch where we're stepping. It's funny. I have 2 boys, and my youngest, my 5-year-old, is a little more OCD than my older one. And so I was telling him that you have to wash your hands, right, after you go to the bathroom and everything. And now he's paranoid that he'll get a parasite because if he doesn't put his shoes on outside, because the transmission route. But it's funny as a practitioner when you see this, you see all the patients come in, and it's real. This stuff is real, and it inspires me to be a better practitioner and make the better choices when you see that.
That's so true. And one thing to note there, I will tell people, some people come in and say, well, there's no way I could have, any gut infections, anything like that, where we see over 50% of parasites present, Candida, whatever, they don't have any gut symptoms. So it's very possible to have 0 gut symptoms, but to have really big gut imbalances that can be causing really big health problems. You see that a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it with anxiety. I think that's one of the biggest things that comes in the office is always on on patients' symptom list is anxiety. How many of us suffer with anxiety or depression? And, it's not, you don't necessarily think, oh, it's my gut that's causing it.
That's super interesting. We always look at the gut too, just because most of your neurotransmitters are made in your gut. Inflammation in the gut equals inflammation in the brain, all things like that. Right on the same page there.
Right.
So gut is really one of probably the biggest things that can affect our genes or exacerbate MTHFR issues. Any other exacerbations or things that can trigger problems in the body that you see?
Yeah, this is kind of a newer one for me getting into, but it is environment, toxicity, and toxins that we breathe, the air. Make sure that we have good purified air. I did have a patient. I always learn through case studies, but this was an interesting one because she got exposed when she was in high school. She was exposed to mold. And just the inhalation of those mycotoxins just started residing in her body, in her fat tissue. And I saw her as a patient many years later, and she wanted to lose a little bit of weight. I helped her achieve that. But when that happened, it also, with the fat cells that relieved, the mycotoxins reestablished and reinoculated her. So she got sick again, just with losing some fat.
Yeah.
So I'm like, wow, that just opened my eyes that environmentally, it really is important where you're breathing, the water you're drinking, if it's infested, if it's, just environmental pieces together, I think is huge. That's
true. And so she felt bad because most toxins are stored in fat, right? And so for lysing those, getting rid of the fat cells, she reabsorbed them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Crazy.
So now we make sure that, especially when people lose weight, because that's a huge goal with people many times, when they're working with this, is to make sure we're binding up all those toxins that are coming out effectively. And you got to have a good working liver and gallbladder for that too.
Oh my gosh, so big. And so a lot of people today, they don't realize the, assault, the bombardment that our bodies are under compared to even our great-great-grandparents or things like that. All the new chemicals that have been introduced to our world in the past 60, 70, 80 years, it's astronomical. The average female puts on 13 personal care products a day, each of which can have hundreds of chemicals in them. So all these things add up, and really they're toxic to our genes. They're toxic to our cells.
Yeah. And you add in a gene called PON1, PON1. And this was interesting because I ran this on my son, my older son, who's 7 now. And we struggled with some things with him. And I did a toxicity panel on him from his urine. And he was just off the charts with organophosphates, which are pesticides. And I'm like, what? I'm like, it's not like we do a whole lot of pesticides. I wash my stuff, but I'm like, what's going on? Then I looked at his genes. He has a double mutation for PON1, which is clearing specifically organophosphates.
Oh.
So knowing from someone who's that young right off the bat, they got some genetic mishaps for detoxification. He's got a high amount of this. What do we do? And detoxification support is huge. Sauna. We have an infrared sauna, which I love. And that just goes into the picture of detoxification and health. And he loves it. So
that's great. I love saunas.
Yes.
And I read a study one time, and it said I think the average American consumes over a gallon of pesticides and herbicides each year from eating conventionally grown fruits and veggies. How disgusting.
That's nasty.
Oh.
That's crazy.
That's why it's so important that you eat organic.
Yes.
So important.
Absolutely.
All right, so those are kind of the big, toxins, gut are the big ones. You could also go into like stress, sleep, exercise, stuff like that. Diet is a huge one also. Any of those other ones, really big on your list?
Yeah, stress is huge. I mean, absolutely huge. I see people don't get well because there's just too much stress in their lives. So that's huge. Absorption, getting all those nutrients in. I think that's one of the biggest things. If you don't have all those cofactors in, is another big one. What about you? What big ones do you see?
Stress is a huge one, just because I feel like everyone today is stressed, but they don't know they're stressed. And a lot of people don't have the tools in order to consciously de-stress to really, calm down that sympathetic response. Because if you're in that state, you're not going to be able to digest your food, like you said, and it all kind of cascades from there. Your cortisol's ramped up, your inflammation's up, which makes everything go haywire, as you know, too. So stress is a big one. Diet, of course, is a huge one, but that's a whole nother talk for a whole nother day, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of did the big picture stuff. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper to MTHFR and methylation. So do you want to talk about methylation first and then go into MTHFR in particular?
Yeah, sure. So I'm so color based and picture based. My brain thinks in pictures. That's what, I like that. So what methylation, if we had to just say, what is methylation? What is that? It's basically your body's ability to detoxify and make new cells. That's as plain and simple as it can be. And we need new cells on a daily basis. We get a new gut every 7 days. It just shreds. When you're dusting your house, all those are dead cells. We got to replace these cells. So we need that process of methylation, that biochemical process to really replenish our tissue in our body.
I love that. Yeah. I've never heard it put quite that way, but I really like that analogy. I've heard also, let me know what you think of this, because you probably know a little bit more than I do. The methylation can be like your body's way of keeping other cells in control also from having, rogue cells go crazy. So it's almost like putting stickers, like shutting down, turning on or turning off cells also. Yeah.
It especially if you go and you just look up methylation, there's so many different things that it does. And that's why it's so hard to lump it into one little easy, this is what it does.
Right.
But there's so many components of that you'll find methylation helps with so many things. But it's a matter of getting those squeaky wheels cleaned. And I bring in demos because I like this one. And this is, if you can see this, I stole this from my kids. But I saw this on the floor. This was a few years ago downstairs because I got it from something. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a visual of what goes on in the body when we're trying to move things through. And you got to start, and this is the gears that you crank one, and you got to get the one at the bottom moving. And if you don't have that missing piece, like say the green for foliage, B9 right here, so you don't have that, you're cranking at one end. Or say you put in way too much of this right here, because you're just going to take like 15 milligrams of Deplin or something like that. And it's just like, imagine this is twice the size, it's going to impact the flow. So ideally when you're working with methylation and the whole MTHFR thing, we want the flow to be nice and smooth. We want to get it cranking.
That's a great visual. I love that. I'm going to have to steal that maybe from you.
Sure. Sure.
So what would people notice, let's say, if they're not methylating properly, if they're under methylating, or let's say if they're methylating too quickly, if they're over methylating, what would be some of the symptoms maybe they could look out for?
Yeah, no, that's good. And I also, in this topic, I definitely think this is a great book to pick up, if people are interested in this, because they're going to go through some of those symptoms in that book. But just for example, anxiety. Like that's one of them. Or if you're laying in bed at night and you cannot sleep, your brain is just rolling and you can't clear it. One of my other sons is like that too. You know, it's like, what is going on biochemically where you can't clear the norepi, the epinephrine, the adrenaline hormones? Or how do you handle coffee? You know, does it make you too revved up? Is it just does it have digestive issues with you too? But really some of the symptoms when you're over methylating, under methylating are going to be is plain as simple as anxiety, depression, if you can't clear those neurotransmitters. So a little interesting fact with the COMT enzyme, so this is another gene on genetics. So it's a gene that all of us have. It helps clear estrogen and it also helps clear epinephrine, all those hormones that are stimulating. Like if you think of something stimulating. So those need magnesium and it needs SAMe to clear. You make this thing called SAMe in your methionine cycle in the part of your methylation. So you make it naturally. But if you're not making it because you're vegan and you're not consuming B12, or maybe you are vegan, but you're just not supplementing it, or maybe, so you need to get those, or you're not digesting properly. So you can't absorb that B12 into your tissue. That B12 is necessary. It is the key factor for moving things along, thinking of back to this through your body. So I don't know if I answered your question. I might have got off track.
That was great. So a lot of brain issues we talked about, which is great. And I also have a slow COMT gene. So I'm really affected by things like green tea and even coffee. So I have to be careful with my intake on that because I don't break them down and get rid of them as quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Brain, you could talk about energy. You talked earlier in the show about pregnancy issues or complications or issues you pass on to your kids even.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or infertility. It's a big one too, right?
That is huge. And I see a lot of patients with infertility or miscarriages that they keep having recurrent miscarriages and is what's going on. And I'm dabbling in some other fun, really interesting stuff with histamine related with miscarriages and infertility. But yeah, if you don't have that enough of those nutrients that are making those wheels crank, man, you can feel the effects of it.
And that's very interesting because a lot of times, women get pregnant, they go to their doctor and they say, oh, take this prenatal, which is full of crap, synthetic vitamins, synthetic folic acid. So I think this would be a good time to talk about folic acid maybe for a second, kind of differentiate.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's funny because in medical school, whether you're a nurse or a doctor or whatnot, they train you that you need folic acid. And they even have the textbooks in there. And, you see one of the end results of not having enough folic acid in pregnancy is this neural tube defect, like midline of the spine. There's defects that goes on. So folic acid is synthetic. It's totally man-made. And it had its time in its day. It had its place in a prenatal because they weren't aware, I guess. Now the research is coming out that you want the bioactive form, you want the bioavailable form of folate. So what happens if you think of it in a term of a step process? You need to get the leafy greens in, folks. We just got to eat the vegetables. We got to, and if you can't tolerate chewing them, get a greens drink. But we got to get the folate. That's where they come with the term foliage. You go watering your plants, think of foliage. You got that. So you got to get the greens in. And you got to go make them crank through that process. And when they go through a certain process in your body, then it develops into the methyl tetrahydrofolate, which is the active form of B9. So if you're looking at a difference between folic acid and the folate, the difference is one is synthetic, man-made. It can block these folate receptors, especially if you have dairy sensitivities as well, because those can block those folate receptors. So if you have these receptors that are blocked, you can't get the folate into them. That's bad news. So you got to stop taking that folic acid. And where can you find folic acid besides a prenatal, especially all you men out there, right? Is just all those bread products. Look on the breads and the cereals. They just totally put that in there. And
yeah, well, usually their products, they're so devoid of nutrition, they have to put fake vitamins and nutrients back in, and they're always man-made total crap and just sabotage us.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking this off the top of my head. So let's say someone has taken a lot of synthetic folic acid, and you said that kind of shuts down the receptors and kind of jams everything up. Would that be like just putting, back to your visual there, for all the different colors in the cog wheels, if you just put like a block in the middle of everything and stopped it all?
Yeah. And you know what, one of the things that can happen right initially, you can take so much folic acid, and there's a lot of people that do, because it is a lot of medications that people are on, like methotrexate. It really blocks that. And so they'll need to take high doses of folic acid. When people take really high doses of folic acid, it can shunt into another pathway called unmetabolized folic acid, or UMFA. And you can actually measure it. It's a test that you can measure. I've never done it specifically with a patient yet. I don't think I have. But one of the signs with that is that if you have too high of the UMFA, the unmetabolized folic acid, that puts you at a higher risk for cancer. And so here we are thinking we're doing ourselves a body good by taking all this folic acid, but are you? That's why we got to do things in moderation. And one of the reasons why I like Dr. Ben Lynch's company with Seeking Health, which is his product company, is he doesn't have any folic, or the folate. He doesn't put over, I think, 3 milligrams in there. So a lot of products out there you can buy from other supplement companies will have 5 milligrams of folate, or 15, even the prescription ones. And that's where a lot of psychiatrists will refer their patients to me, because they are giving them the Deplin, but they're not getting the results that they want. And it's just way too much. Yeah. So I love the clarity that his supplement company realizes, you got to take a step back, and not too much is not always better.
Gotcha. I love that point, because we always think, I've got this problem, I need to take 10 times the amount, for everything to function 10 times better, which is not always the case. But I think, and to your point also, quality when you're looking at products is probably the most important thing. And then 2, getting it from food is probably the best choice. Would you agree? Yeah, absolutely. And if people come in with going back to where we were at the beginning, if they're coming in with a pathogen, or a gut that is more impermeable than we'd like to have, are they going to absorb it from their food if they go to shop at Whole Foods? No. So that's when you need to bring in the supplementation, right, until the tissue is healthy enough to regrow and you can get good absorption. I love that. So if someone thinks they have, some kind of these problems, maybe it's MTHFR, maybe it's in their gene, how do they find out? Do you have people test? Do you just go by questionnaires or symptoms? How do you work with your patients? No, that's good, because I used to start with doing lots of genetic testing, and people will come in saying, hey, I have done this. It's not the first line that I start with people when they're patients that are especially wanting to get more into MTHFR, because this is an interesting concept here, is that you can have really perfect MTHFR genes, but they can get dirty just with your environment. Like, just because you have a beautiful green or minus on your lab report for MTHFR doesn't mean your methylation is awesome. You could still really have crappy methylation, but it's green because you have a parasite, or you have candida overgrowth and you have a horrible diet and you're stressed out and you have a horrible job you don't like. You know what I mean? So I don't start it testing. I really don't. That's something that we can pull in as we start cleaning up the epigenetic aspect of it. So that's a hard time. Sometimes people have a hard time just understanding that, because they want to come in, they want to dive into the genetics, but I'm like, seriously, we're going to save some money first. we got to prioritize your finances, but also let's do what's the best here. But if we were to do testing, what I like to do is I like Dr. Lynch's strategy and report. So you can do that when you go through 23andme.com, and you don't need the fancy one. You don't need the $200 one. Sometimes it's on sale for $69 or $49 or whatever it is. So you can just get the basic one. You extract that data from there and you upload it into Strategene. I think it's like $45 for that. And what I do like about his, because I've played around with a bunch of different of these gene decoders, he picks the clinically relevant ones.
Guys, we have a ton of genetics, genes, and just because you have one plus and one minus in a specific gene doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just what it is. And so what his team has done is they've researched all the best ones out there, and they've narrowed it down to 7. I'm sure he probably will go into future ones as well. And in his book, he narrowed it down to 7. But in the strategy, there's like 17 pages. And it's backed up with research. It's not just, it's what it says. They've done their research in it. So that's the one I like to use if we bring it in.
That's cool. And I love your approach about we have to fix the epigenetics first. You have to fix the basics, because those are all the things that affect our genes and that they make us healthy or make us sick. And I love your approach, Ben Lynch's approach. I love the GI map test, looking at the gut, all this stuff. It's just right up my alley. That's great.
Awesome.
So I want to kind of end with, if people think, they've got some of these problems, maybe they're anxious or depressed, or maybe they're infertile, or maybe they've got some fatigue or something like that, what would be the big health takeaways for them, to kind of go home and say, hey, I can do this for my health, or where would they start, or what would be the process? I would say.
Yeah, the best thing that people can do is make make good food choices. It really gets down to making the best food choices. And I recently did a workshop on methylation and digestion, and giving people 4 key takeaways that they can start implementing, and not necessarily take this supplement and this supplement and this supplement. Yeah, they're healthy when it's needed, but rest, relax. That's going to help your stomach acid production. You can bring in certain teas, like ginger tea can really be helpful for stimulating different digestive enzymes. So cook with some more ginger in your diet. But really, paleo is a great place to start, especially if they're wanting to get pregnant or whatnot. You got to remove those inflammatory foods and dairy. And that's hard for a lot of people to do. Dairy's hard, but you can do it. And I would definitely say the diet piece is the first plan of action. And the other thing on that is that sugar, because that's really what we want to do. We want to minimize sugar consumption. And if you want to leave this today and take something away from it, I would say track what you're eating. Use a free app like MyFitnessPal, and which is a food log. You can download it on your phone if you don't know what it is, or on your computer. Track what you're eating just on a weekly basis and see what you're doing. Most likely there's way too many carbs in the picture, and so you got to cut those in half. That's where I like to start with people who are not really working them up, but that's a place where you can start and take it and run with it.
Love it, Dr. Emily. All that's spot on.
Thank you.
How can people find you if they're interested, they want to learn more, or see what's up? So where can they find you?
Yeah, pretty simple. So I am social. I'm on Facebook here at Enlighten Functional Medicine. I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Emily STL. That's Dr. Emily STL. And if you want to learn a bit more about me on the website, it's enlightenstl.com.
Awesome. So what we'll do, we'll probably link to those below also. If you guys are interested, you can check that out too. Dr. Emily, thanks so much. I learned a bunch today too. And I think people watching could learn a bunch from you today also. So thanks for all you do. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Doc. I appreciate it too.
You bet. You have a good day. Hope everyone else has a great day also. All right.
Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Bye.